On a Saturday morning in March 2015, thousands of Canadians drove to their local Future Shop and found the doors locked. No warning, no countdown, no farewell sale, just a piece of paper taped to the glass. At its peak, Future Shop was the most powerful electronics retailer in Canada. 149 stores stretching from Vancouver to Halifax. Red signs blazing on every major highway. Commissioned salespeople who knew every spec of every product on the floor and could talk to you in Punjabi, Cantonese, or Tagalog if that's what you needed. For 33 years, Future Shop was where Canadians bought their first computer, their first big television, their first real home stereo system. It wasn't just a store, it was a rite of passage. Then in a single press release on a Saturday morning, it was gone. How does a 33-year institution, one that helped define what it meant to be Canadian, disappear without a single day's notice? That is the story this video tells. In 1979, Iran was burning. The revolution that toppled the Shah had turned the country inside out. Businesses were nationalized overnight. Families who had built something, a store, a factory, a life, watched it disappear by government decree. For a young entrepreneur named Hassan Khosrow Shahi, the message was clear. Whatever you build here, they can take it away. So he left. He was not the first Iranian to flee in those years, and he would not be the last. But what he carried with him was not gold or documents or family heirlooms. What Hassan Khosrow Shahi carried was an idea, a specific stubborn belief about how a retail business should work. He landed in Vancouver, British Columbia in the early 1980s. Vancouver in 1982 was a different city than it is today. Quieter, younger, still figuring out what it wanted to be. The tech boom had not yet arrived. Personal computers were exotic objects, priced out of reach for most families. Consumer electronics meant a television, maybe a clock radio, maybe a hi-fi system if you were doing well. And the stores that sold these things were small, dusty, and staffed by people who knew very little and cared even less. Khosrow Shahi saw the gap immediately. He opened the first Future Shop in Vancouver in 1982. The store was not glamorous. It was large by the standards of the day. Big open floor, bright lighting, products displayed where customers could actually touch them. But what made it different was not the layout. What made it different was the people behind the counter. From day one, Future Shop ran on a commission model. Every salesperson on that floor earned based on what they sold. No sale, no commission. Big sale, big paycheck. It was a system that rewarded knowledge, hustle, and genuine customer service. Because if a customer walked out without buying, the salesperson went home with less money in their pocket. That simple equation changed everything about how the store operated. The salespeople at Future Shop learned their products cold. They studied spec sheets. They kept up with new releases. They could explain the difference between two television sets in terms a first-time buyer could actually understand, because their income depended on making that explanation land. Customers noticed. They came back. They brought their neighbors. In those early years, Future Shop's customer base reflected Vancouver itself. Working-class families, recent immigrants, young couples furnishing their first apartment. These were not wealthy buyers. These were people making careful decisions with money they had saved. And what they found at Future Shop was something rare in Canadian retail at the time. A salesperson who took their budget seriously and helped them get the most out of it. There is a version of that first store that stays with the people who remember it. The floor was loud. Demo units playing, salespeople talking, music running through the sound systems on display. It smelled like new plastic and packaging foam. The lighting was bright enough that every product looked its best. And somewhere in the middle of all of it, a man in his 30s was watching the floor, adjusting, learning, building. Hassan Khosrow Shahi was not a loud presence. People who worked with him in those early years described him as quiet, precise, and deeply serious about quality. He did not want a bargain bin operation. He wanted a store where a family could walk in, trust the person helping them, and walk out with something that would last. By 1990, just 8 years after that first Vancouver store, Future Shop was the largest consumer electronics retailer in all of Canada. 38 stores, a national footprint, and a founder who had proved, in the most concrete way possible, that the idea he carried out of Iran was worth something. The dream had become a machine, and the machine was just getting started. There is a specific feeling that people who grew up in Canada in the 1990s describe when they talk about Future Shop. It hits you the moment you walk through the sliding doors. A wall of sound, televisions running on every wall, stereo systems playing something with enough bass to feel in your chest, the low hum of hundreds of devices all powered on at once. The lighting is bright white, the kind that makes everything look new. The carpet is dark. The shelves go all the way to the ceiling. And everywhere you look, there are men and women in red shirts moving with purpose. Not waiting for you to come to them, but coming to you. This was Future Shop at its height, and for millions of Canadians, it was unlike anything else in retail. The 1990s were the decade that made the brand. Personal computers had come down in price enough that a middle-class family could consider one, but not so far down that buying one felt casual. It was still a serious purchase, a family decision, the kind of thing you talked about at the dinner table for 2 weeks before you went to the store. And when you finally went, you went to Future Shop. The salespeople made the difference. Under the commission model that Khosrow had built from day one, the best Future Shop employees were not just salespeople. They were, in the truest sense, advisors. A salesperson who had been on the floor for 3 years knew every computer on that shelf. The processor speed, the RAM, the warranty terms, which one ran hot, which one the manufacturer had quietly updated 6 months ago. They knew because their paycheck depended on knowing. A customer who bought the wrong computer and returned it cost everyone. A customer who bought the right one came back. For immigrant families arriving in Canada in the 1990s, Future Shop held a particular significance. The commission floor was one of the few retail environments in the country where a new Canadian, someone who had been in the country for 2 years, who spoke English as a second language, who was still learning the rhythms of this new place, could walk in and find someone who spoke their language. Not figuratively, literally. Future Shop locations in cities like Vancouver, Toronto, and Calgary employed salespeople who spoke Punjabi, Cantonese, Tagalog, Hindi, and Mandarin, because those salespeople could sell to those communities. And those communities bought. There is a story, repeated in different forms by different people who worked at Future Shop in those years, about what it meant to be a top salesperson on that floor. In the late 1990s, the best commissioned salespeople at Future Shop were earning between $80,000 and $100,000 a year. Not managers, salespeople. People in their mid-20s who had never finished a university degree, who had walked onto the floor at 19 and learned the business from the ground up. Their friends with 4-year degrees were making $40,000 in offices downtown. The Future Shop floor was, for a certain kind of driven young person, the closest thing Canada had to a meritocracy. That energy was real. Customers felt it. You walked into Future Shop, and the place was alive in a way that a department store never was. The rituals built up over time the way rituals always do. Slowly, then completely. Boxing Day was the cathedral moment. Every December 26th, in cities across Canada, lines formed outside Future Shop locations before dawn. People brought folding chairs and thermoses of coffee and parked themselves on the sidewalk in temperatures that could drop to -20 in Winnipeg or Edmonton. They were not there because they had to be. They were there because it had become an event, a social occasion wrapped around a commercial one. You went with a friend or a brother or a coworker. You stamped your feet to stay warm. You talked about what you were going to buy, and when the doors opened and the crowd pushed in, there was a specific electric feeling. The feeling of being part of something larger than yourself. The weekly flyer was its own institution. Every Thursday, Future Shop's advertising insert landed in mailboxes across the country. Families sat at kitchen tables and went through it page by page, circling items, comparing prices, making plans. The flyer was not just advertising. It was a weekly reminder that technology was moving forward and that Future Shop was where you caught up with it. A new CD player, a faster modem, a television with a bigger screen than the one you had. The flyer told you what was possible. The store was where you went to make it real. And then there was the generational transmission. the thing that turned customers into something more than customers. A father who had bought his first VCR at Future Shop in 1987 brought his son in 1996 to buy his first computer. That son, now grown, brought his own daughter in 2008 to buy her first laptop. 3 generations. The same red signs, the same bright lights, the same commissioned salesperson walking over with the same question. What are you looking for today? That continuity was not accidental. It was the product of consistency, of a store that looked and felt and operated the same way in Halifax as it did in Calgary, year after year. Khosrow Shahi had built something that Canadians trusted because it never surprised them in the wrong direction. You knew what you were walking into. You knew you would be helped. You knew the price would be fair. And you knew that if something went wrong, you could walk back through those sliding doors and someone in a red shirt would deal with it. By the late 1990s, Future Shop was not just a retailer. It was a fixed point in Canadian life. The place you went when something important happened, when you got the promotion, when the kids went back to school, when the old television finally died. It marked the moments that mattered. What was it about that red-lit floor, that wall of sound, those red shirts moving through the aisles, that made Canadians feel, year after year, that this was their store? The answer, it turns out, had everything to do with who built it, and nothing to do with who eventually owned it. Because in 2001, ownership was about to change everything. Growth, when it works, feels inevitable in hindsight. By 1990, Future Shop had 38 stores and the largest electronics retail footprint in Canada. By 1993, it had 36 stores operating profitably enough to go public, listing on both the Toronto Stock Exchange and the Vancouver Stock Exchange that year. The IPO was not a gamble. It was a confirmation. The market looked at what Hassan Khosrowshahi had built and said, "This is real, this is scalable, and this is worth backing." The expansion that followed was deliberate and physical. Future Shop did not chase downtown locations or high-rent shopping mall anchors. The formula was suburban, large format stores on high-traffic arterials, the kind of road you drove on the way home from work, big parking lots, high visibility from the street, floor space large enough to display every category at full size, so a customer could walk in looking for a television and walk out having also decided on a new computer and a surround sound system they hadn't planned on buying when they left the house. The store design reinforced the sales culture. Nothing was hidden. Products were out in the open, powered on, running. You could pick up the camera. You could sit in front of the computer. You could stand 6 inches from the television screen and decide for yourself whether the picture was worth the price. In an era when most electronics retailers kept their merchandise behind glass or on locked shelving, Future Shop's open floor model felt radical. It trusted the customer, and customers responded to being trusted. The franchise model never took hold at Future Shop the way it did at restaurant chains. Khosrowshahi kept the operation corporate. Every store owned and operated by the company, every salesperson on the same commission structure, every location held to the same standards. That decision cost more in the short term. Corporate expansion is slower and more capital-intensive than franchising, but it meant that the customer experience in a Future Shop in Regina was the same as the customer experience in a Future Shop in Vancouver. The red shirt meant the same thing everywhere. By 1993, with the IPO complete and expansion capital in hand, Khosrowshahi made the decision that would define the next 6 years of the company's history and nearly end it. He took Future Shop into the United States. The logic was straightforward. The commission model worked. The open floor concept worked. Canadian consumers had responded to it overwhelmingly. Why wouldn't American consumers respond the same way? Between 1993 and 1999, Future Shop opened 23 stores in the American Pacific Northwest, Washington State, Oregon, and Northern California. The locations were chosen carefully, geographically close to the Canadian operations, in markets where the brand had some name recognition from cross-border shoppers. It did not work. The American consumer electronics market in the mid-1990s was not the Canadian market. It was a battlefield. Circuit City was operating over 600 stores nationally with decades of brand equity and deep supplier relationships. Best Buy, headquartered in Minnesota, was in the middle of an aggressive national expansion of its own and had already cracked the non-commission, big box format that would eventually reshape the entire industry. CompUSA was attacking the computer segment. The margins were thinner, the competition was fiercer, and Future Shop, a Canadian company operating 24 stores in a corner of the American market, did not have the scale to compete. The losses mounted steadily through the late 1990s. Khosrow Shahi watched the numbers and made the call that separated him from the operators who let pride drive companies into the ground. He pulled out. In 1999, Future Shop exited the United States entirely. All 23 American stores were closed. The capital was repatriated to Canada. The company refocused completely on the market it understood, the market it had built from nothing, the market where the red sign still meant something. It was not a defeat. It was a correction. And in Canada, the correction looked like strength. With the American experiment closed and the balance sheet cleaned up, Future Shop entered the new millennium leaner and more focused than it had ever been. Over 100 stores across every province. A workforce that had grown with the company, that understood the culture, that still believed in the commission model as a way of life rather than a line on a contract. The employees of that era described something that is difficult to quantify but easy to recognize: a pride of place. Walking onto the Future Shop floor in 1999 or 2000 felt like walking onto a winning team. The brand was strong, the customers were loyal, the paychecks were good for the people who put in the work, and the founder, the quiet man who had come from Tehran with an idea and turned it into the dominant electronics retailer of a nation, was still the person setting the tone. None of them knew that in less than 2 years he would sell. None of them knew that the company that would buy Future Shop had been watching from across the border, studying the model, calculating the price, and deciding that the most efficient way to enter the Canadian market was not to compete with Future Shop. It was to own it. There is a moment in the life of certain businesses when they stop being businesses and become something else entirely. Future Shop crossed that line sometime in the mid-1990s, and the crossing was quiet enough that nobody announced it. There was no press release, no rebranding campaign. It happened the way most cultural shifts happen, gradually, then all at once, until one day a family in Saskatoon or St. John or Scarborough referred to Future Shop not as a store they sometimes visited, but as the store, the one you went to, the one that was always there. By the year 2000, Future Shop operated 104 stores across Canada. That number alone does not capture what the brand had become. Numbers rarely do. What captured it was the Boxing Day line at 6 in the morning, stretching around the building in the dark. What captured it was the Thursday flyer on the kitchen table, dog-eared and argued over before anyone had eaten breakfast. What captured it was the specific conversation that happened in living rooms across the country every time a television broke or a computer finally gave out. Not where should we go, but we need to go to Future Shop. The brand had achieved something that most retailers spend their entire existence chasing and never reach. It had become the default. For the generation of Canadians who came of age in the 1990s, Future Shop marked the major technological transitions of their lives with a consistency that felt almost ceremonial. The first CD player, the first computer with internet access, the first cell phone that was actually worth having, the first flat-screen television bought after months of walking past it in the store and telling yourself you'd wait until the price came down. These were not trivial purchases. They were threshold moments, the kind that people remember the way they remember a first car or a first apartment, and Future Shop was the stage on which those moments played out. The commission sales floor, which had always been the engine of the company's culture, reached its fullest expression in these years. The best salespeople on the floor in 2000 were not interchangeable retail workers. They were specialists, people who had spent years learning a product category deeply enough to field any question a customer could bring them. A customer who walked in knowing nothing about home theater systems could spend 45 minutes with the right Future Shop salesperson and walk out with a genuine education. Not a sales pitch, an education. Because the salesperson's interest in the customer's satisfaction was not philosophical. It was financial. A customer who understood what they were buying, who felt confident in the decision, came back. A customer who felt pressured or confused did not. That dynamic created a floor culture that was, at its best, genuinely collaborative. Senior salespeople mentored junior ones not out of generosity, but out of self-interest. A better floor meant more traffic, meant more sales for everyone. Managers set targets, but the culture set the standard. And the standard in the best Future Shop locations of that era was high. For the communities of new Canadians who had made Future Shop their store in the 1990s, the brand carried a weight that went beyond commerce. To walk into a Future Shop in Richmond, British Columbia, or in Brampton, Ontario, and be greeted in your own language by someone who understood your budget and respected your questions. That was not a small thing. It was, for many families, their first experience of feeling genuinely welcomed by Canadian retail. The red shirt became a symbol of access, of possibility, of a country that, at least in this one specific place, was willing to meet you where you were. The advertising of that era captured the energy without fully capturing the meaning. Future Shop's television commercials were loud and fast. Product features delivered at a pace that matched the floor energy, prices announced like headlines, the red logo burning at the end of every spot. The tagline, "Putting technology within reach," was not elegant, but it was honest. That was exactly what the company was doing, and Canadians believed it because they had experienced it. When a place becomes part of how a family measures time, when parents can say, "We bought that when you were 7," and point to something that came from a specific store, that store has crossed out of retail and into memory. Future Shop had crossed that line. It was woven into the fabric of ordinary Canadian life in a way that its competitors, for all their size and resources, never managed to replicate. The red sign on the highway was not just a sign. It was a landmark, a fixed point. The kind of thing you notice when it's there and feel the absence of when it's gone. When a place makes you feel like you belong, when it knows your language, respects your budget, and sends you home with something that changes how your family lives. Is it still just a store? By 2001, the answer for millions of Canadians was no, which made what happened next not just a business transaction. It made it a loss. In November 2001, Best Buy paid 580 million Canadian dollars for Future Shop. At the time, the deal was framed as a partnership. Best Buy, the American retail giant headquartered in Richfield, Minnesota, was looking to enter the Canadian market. Future Shop was the dominant player in that market. Rather than build from scratch in a country where Future Shop already owned the customer relationship, Best Buy chose to buy the relationship outright. The press release used words like complementary and strategic alignment. Hassan Khosrow Shahi, who walked away from the sale with enough capital to spend the rest of his life funding hospitals and universities, said the right things about Future Shop's future being bright. The analysts called it a smart deal for both sides. What nobody said out loud, at least not in public, was the more precise truth. Best Buy had not bought a partner. Best Buy had bought a competitor, and the question of what to do with that competitor, now that it was safely owned, would take 14 years to fully answer. The first unusual decision came almost immediately. Rather than retiring the Future Shop brand and converting the stores to Best Buy locations, the standard playbook for this kind of acquisition, Best Buy chose to run both banners simultaneously. Future Shop stores stayed Future Shop. Best Buy then began opening its own Canadian locations, often in the same markets, sometimes in the same shopping centers, occasionally sharing the same parking lot as an existing Future Shop. To the outside world, this looked like confidence. Two strong banners, two different customer experiences, maximum market coverage. Best Buy presented it as a deliberate strategy to serve different kinds of Canadian shoppers. Future Shop for the customer who wanted a high-energy commission floor, Best Buy for the customer who preferred a lower-pressure browsing experience. To the people working inside Future Shop, it looked like something else. A senior salesperson who had been on the floor since the mid-1990s described walking through a newly opened Best Buy location in his city and feeling for the first time a specific unease. The products were the same, the prices were the same, The building was newer and cleaner, and the staff, working without commission, were relaxed in a way that future shop staff never were, but also less knowledgeable, less hungry, less likely to follow a customer through every question until the sale was made. He went back to his future shop that afternoon and looked at his floor differently. Not worse, but differently. For the first time, he understood that the company that signed his paycheck was also operating the store across the parking lot, and he could not quite work out whether that was meant to make him feel secure or afraid. The answer, it would turn out, was neither. It was simply a fact, one whose full implications would not become clear for several more years. But the unease was real, and it was the first crack. The second crack came from outside the company entirely, and it arrived in the hands of the customers themselves. By the mid-2000s, e-commerce had matured enough to create a new kind of shopper, one who had done all their research online before setting foot in a store, who knew exactly which product they wanted, who had found it cheaper on an American website, and who walked into Future Shop not to be advised but to be price matched. Future Shop responded the way most large retailers responded. It introduced a formal price match policy. Any product in stock sold by a Canadian retailer, Future Shop would match the price. It was a defensive move designed to keep customers from walking out the door. And it worked in the narrow sense that customers stayed. What it destroyed was the commission model. The commission structure at Future Shop had always been built on margin. A salesperson's earnings were not simply a percentage of the sale price. They were calculated against the margin the store made on that sale. Sell a television at full price. Earn a meaningful commission. Sell the same television at a price match rate that cut the margin in half. Earn a fraction of what the sale should have been worth. As price matching became not the exception, but the expectation, as customers arrived with printed pages from Amazon.com and Newegg and demanded that Future Shop meet those prices on the spot, the commissions compressed. A salesperson who had been earning $80,000 a year in 2001 found themselves earning $55,000 in 2006, doing the same job, the same hours, the same level of expertise, against a margin structure that had been systematically hollowed out by the shift to online price discovery. The effect on the floor culture was not immediate. It was gradual, which made it harder to name and harder to fight. The best salespeople, the ones who had built their careers on the Future Shop floor and had options, began to leave. Not all at once, one at a time, quietly, for other industries or other cities. The institutional knowledge they carried, the specific expertise, the customer relationships, the mentorship of younger staff, left with them. What replaced them was a younger, cheaper workforce that had not grown up in the commission culture and did not carry the same investment in the brand. They were not bad employees. They were simply employees, people doing a job rather than people building a career. The floor energy that had defined Future Shop for 2 decades began to flatten. Customers noticed, not in a way they could articulate immediately, not in the way you notice a price increase or a policy change. They noticed it the way you notice that a restaurant you've been going to for years has changed somehow, that the food is technically the same, but something in the experience is different, that the place no longer feels quite like itself. The red shirts were still there, the signs were still red, the products were still displayed on the open floor. But the thing that had made Future Shop, the hunger, the knowledge, the genuine transactional energy between a great salesperson and a customer making a real decision, was quietly bleeding out. How long could a brand this beloved survive on reputation alone? Once the culture that built that reputation had begun to erode, the board of directors in Burnaby had an answer. They just weren't sharing it yet. There is a particular kind of corporate decision that looks from the outside like strategy and feels from the inside like betrayal. Best Buy's management of Future Shop between 2008 and 2014 was full of those decisions. They were not dramatic. They were not announced. They arrived quietly in the form of budget allocations and renovation schedules and staffing directives. The kind of operational choices that never make headlines, but accumulated over years tell you everything about what a parent company actually intends to do with a subsidiary it no longer needs. The first signal was physical. Starting around 2008, Best Buy began a systematic program of store renovations across its Canadian locations, new fixtures, new lighting, updated signage, the kind of investment that tells a customer, and more importantly, tells an employee, that the company believes in this location, that this place has a future, that someone at headquarters cares whether it looks good. Future shop locations in the same period received a different kind of attention. Maintenance budgets were held flat, renovation requests from store managers were deferred again, then quietly dropped. The carpet that had looked sharp in 1998 began to show its age. The fixtures that had felt current in 2002 began to feel dated. The lighting that had made products glow began to seem merely bright rather than inviting. It was not neglect in the dramatic sense. Nothing was broken, nothing was visibly wrong. But anyone who walked into a Future Shop location in 2010 and then walked into the Best Buy that had opened 2 miles away could feel the difference. One store felt like a company investing in itself. The other felt like a company being maintained at minimum cost until a decision was made. The decision, as it turned out, had already been made. It simply had not been announced. Inside the organization, the people who paid attention understood what was happening. A store manager who had run a Future Shop location in Ontario for 11 years described attending a regional operations meeting in 2009 and noticing, for the first time, that the energy in the room had changed. The Future Shop managers were still present. The metrics were still being reviewed. But the conversation about growth, about new locations, new initiatives, new investments, was entirely about Best Buy. Future Shop was discussed in terms of maintenance. Best Buy was discussed in terms of the future. He drove home from that meeting and called his wife. He told her he thought they had maybe 3 years. He was off by 3 years. But the instinct was correct. The dual banner strategy that Best Buy had presented as a strength, 2 brands, 2 customer experiences, maximum Canadian market coverage, had by this point revealed itself as something closer to its opposite. Rather than 2 complementary operations reinforcing each other, Best Buy and Future Shop had spent a decade cannibalizing each other's sales, confusing suppliers about which banner to prioritize, and creating an internal competition for resources that Future Shop consistently lost. The commission sales model, which had been Future Shop's defining competitive advantage since 1982, had become, in Best Buy's framework, a liability. It was more expensive to operate than a non-commission floor. It created inconsistency. A great commission salesperson produced extraordinary results, but a mediocre one produced friction and customer complaints. Best Buy's operational preference was for predictability, for standardization, for the kind of scalable retail experience that could be replicated identically across hundreds of locations without depending on the individual quality of any single employee. Future Shop's soul was the opposite of that. Future Shop's soul was the individual, the salesperson who knew everything, the floor that was alive because the people on it had skin in the game. Those 2 things could not coexist indefinitely under the same corporate roof. The vendor relationships told the same story from a different angle. By the early 2010s, major electronics manufacturers, Samsung, LG, Apple, Sony, had developed sophisticated retail partnership programs. They paid kickbacks, provided dedicated display space funding, and offered spiff payments, direct cash bonuses to individual salespeople for moving specific products. These programs were legal, common, and corrosive. At Future Shop, the spiff system layered on top of the existing commission structure in ways that gradually distorted the floor culture. A salesperson advising a customer on a television purchase was now operating with multiple financial incentives that had nothing to do with the customer's actual needs. The base commission pointed toward margin. The spiff pointed toward whoever was paying the most that quarter. The price match policy pointed toward the lowest number the customer had found online. These competing pressures pulled in different directions simultaneously, and the customer, the person standing on the floor trying to make a good decision, was caught in the middle. The knowledge culture, the thing that had made Future Shop's commission model genuinely valuable to customers rather than merely aggressive, required a salesperson whose primary loyalty was to the customer's satisfaction. SPIF programs made that loyalty negotiable. Not for every salesperson, not all at once, but enough over enough time that the floor experience began to shift in ways that longtime customers felt without being able to name. Meanwhile, the structural problems compounded. In January 2013, Best Buy Canada announced the closure of 15 stores, 7 Best Buy locations, and 8 Future Shop locations. The company described it as a rationalization of overlapping markets. The language was measured and corporate. What it meant for the 8 Future Shop store managers who received the call that month was that their locations were gone. The closures were not random. They followed a pattern that anyone paying attention could read clearly. Where a Best Buy and a Future Shop existed in close proximity, the Future Shop was the one that closed. Not always, but consistently enough that the pattern was visible to anyone inside the organization who wanted to see it. A Future Shop assistant manager in Western Canada described the atmosphere in his store in the months following the January 2013 announcement. The sales floor still opened every morning. The red shirts still went to work. The customers still came in. But something had shifted in the way people held themselves. The conversations in the break room were different. People were doing the math, counting the stores that had closed, looking at the Best Buy 2 miles away, calculating their own odds. The top performers started updating their resumes, not publicly, not dramatically, quietly, the way people do when they have not yet decided to leave, but have decided to be ready. By 2014, Future Shop had 131 locations remaining across Canada. The brand was still visible. The signs were still red. To a customer driving past on a Saturday afternoon, nothing looked wrong. But inside the organization, at every level from regional management down to the sales floor, the people who had built their careers inside those red walls understood that the end was coming. They did not know when. They did not know how. They had not been told anything officially. They knew the way you know when a relationship is over before either person has said it out loud. You can feel it in the silences, in the things that used to get fixed and no longer do, in the meetings where your name comes up less and less, until one day it doesn't come up at all. And who exactly was responsible for the 30,000 people who had given years of their working lives to a brand that had already been condemned in a boardroom they were never invited into? That question would not be answered on a Saturday morning in March 2015. It would simply be made irrelevant. Saturday, March 28, 2015 began like any other retail morning. Across Canada, Future Shop employees drove to work in the early hours. They stopped for coffee. They thought about their sales targets for the day. Some of them had worked the same location for 10 years. Some had started the week before. All of them had the same expectation when they pulled into the parking lot: that the store would open, the floor would fill with customers, and the day would proceed the way retail days do, busy in stretches, slow in others, ending with a count of what had been sold and what needed to be restocked. What they found instead was a locked door, and taped to the glass a notice. The notice informed them that their location was permanently closed, effective immediately, and directed them to a phone number for further information regarding their employment status. It did not thank them for their service. It did not explain the decision in any detail. It was, by every account of the people who read it that morning, a piece of paper that ended careers in 2 short paragraphs. At 10 o'clock that morning, Best Buy Canada issued a press release. The company announced that it was consolidating the Future Shop and Best Buy banners under a single brand. 66 Future Shop locations would close permanently, effective immediately. The remaining 65 Future Shop locations would be closed temporarily for approximately 1 week, while they were converted into Best Buy stores. When those doors reopened, the red signs would be gone, the Future Shop name would be gone, the commission sales model would be gone. Everything that had defined the brand for 33 years would be gone. The entire announcement took less than 400 words. For the employees standing in parking lots across the country, reading notices on locked glass doors, the math was immediate and brutal. 1,500 jobs eliminated in a single morning, 500 full-time positions, 1,000 part-time. People who had health benefits through their Future Shop employment lost them that day. People who had structured their family finances around a Future Shop paycheck had, by 10 o'clock on a Saturday morning, no paycheck to structure around. The severance packages that Best Buy Canada offered in the days that followed became a source of public controversy. Labor advocates in multiple provinces argued that the packages did not meet the minimum requirements of provincial employment standards legislation, that workers who had given 5, 8, 10 years to the company were being offered settlements that did not reflect the tenure and contribution those years represented. Some employees accepted what they were offered because they needed the money immediately. Others consulted lawyers. A small number pursued formal complaints through provincial labor boards. None of it brought the store back. The customer response was immediate and entirely without corporate orchestration. Within hours of the announcement, social media filled with the kind of content that no marketing department can manufacture: genuine, personal, specific memory. People posted photographs of themselves in Future Shop stores from the 1990s. They posted receipts they had kept somehow from purchases made 15 years earlier. They wrote paragraphs about the salesperson who had helped them choose their first computer, whose name they still remembered, whose advice had turned out to be exactly right. The hashtag trended nationally. Canadian journalists who had covered retail for decades described the public reaction as something they had not seen since Eaton's, the beloved Canadian department store chain that had collapsed in 1999 after 130 years of operation. That comparison was not made casually. Eaton's had been, for generations of Canadians, the emotional center of Canadian retail. Its loss had felt like a national bereavement. Future Shop did not carry quite the same weight of history. It was 33 years old, not 130, but for the generation that had grown up with it, the feeling was recognizable. Something that had always been there was suddenly completely gone. In the cities where Future Shop and Best Buy had shared the same parking lot, and there were many, the geometry of the situation was visible in the most literal possible way. One set of doors was locked, the red sign dark. 20 feet away, across the same asphalt, another set of doors was open, the blue Best Buy sign lit. Customers who had driven to the Future Shop out of habit found themselves standing between the two buildings, making a decision that had already been made for them. Most of them walked into the Best Buy. There was nowhere else to go. Inside those converted locations, the transformation happened quickly. The red signage came down first. Then the Future Shop branding on the walls, the floors, the staff uniforms. The commission sales structure was dismantled. The employees who had been working Future Shop locations on commission were offered positions at the converted Best Buy stores at hourly wages. Some accepted. Many did not. The ones who had built their livelihoods on the commission model understood correctly that an hourly wage at Best Buy was not a lateral move. It was a fundamental change in what the work was and what it could provide. The physical conversion of 65 stores took approximately 1 week. On April 6, 2015, 9 days after the announcement, Best Buy Canada reopened the converted locations under its own banner. The company held no ceremonies. There were no ribbon cuttings. The doors simply opened, and the stores that had been Future Shop the week before were now Best Buy, as if the intervening 33 years had been a temporary arrangement that had simply reached its natural conclusion. For the franchise owners, Future Shop had never operated on a traditional franchise model, but some operators had multi-location arrangements with the company. The closure created financial complications that took months and in some cases years to fully resolve. Lease obligations on permanently closed locations did not disappear when Best Buy shuttered the stores. Landlords in strip malls and suburban retail centers across the country found themselves holding leases on large format spaces that were now empty, in markets where large format electronics retail was not exactly a growth category. Several of those locations remained dark for years. The Future Shop footprint, the large suburban boxes that Khosrow Shahi had identified as the right format in the 1980s and that the company had built its entire national presence around, proved difficult to repurpose. Some were eventually subdivided and leased to multiple smaller tenants. Some were taken over by grocery chains or fitness centers. A few simply sat empty. the faded ghost of red signage still faintly visible beneath the paint that had been applied over it. The last original Future Shop location, the stores that were closed permanently rather than converted, did not receive a documented final day in the way that some beloved retail closures do. There was no last customer served, no ceremonial final transaction, no photograph of a longtime employee locking the door for the last time that made the national news. The 66 permanently closed locations simply stopped being Future Shop on the morning of March 28th, simultaneously across the entire country, without ceremony or acknowledgement. That absence of ceremony was itself a kind of statement. A company that had been built on personal relationships, on the specific human transaction between a knowledgeable salesperson and a customer making a real decision, ended without a single personal acknowledgement of what had been built or who had built it. No tribute to the employees who had given decades to the floor. No recognition of the customers whose loyalty had sustained the brand through 3 decades of competition and change. No word from the ownership that had collected $580 million for the company in 2001 and had now determined that the brand it had purchased was no longer worth maintaining. Just a press release, and a locked door, and a piece of paper taped to the glass. In Winnipeg, a woman who had bought her first computer at Future Shop in 1994 drove past her local location on the afternoon of March 28th and saw the parking lot empty, the lights off, the sign already being prepared for removal. She had been a customer for 21 years. She had bought her children's first laptops there. She had gone back year after year because the place had never let her down. She did not stop the car. There was nothing to stop for. She drove home and told her husband that Future Shop was gone. He asked when it had closed. She said, "This morning." He said, "Just like that?" She said, "Just like that." When the red signs came down, the questions began, not the operational questions. Those were answered quickly enough, in the language of press releases and investor calls and quarterly earnings reports. The operational questions had clean answers. Best Buy Canada consolidated its market position. The dual banner confusion was eliminated, the cost structure simplified. By the metrics that corporate retail uses to measure itself, the decision to end Future Shop was defensible. Possibly correct. The other questions, the ones that did not have clean answers, took longer to surface. And some of them are still being asked. Hassan Khosrowshahi, the man who had built Future Shop from a single Vancouver store into the dominant electronics retailer of a nation, had been largely absent from the company's story since the 2001 sale. He had done what he said he would do with the proceeds. He gave most of it away. The Khosrowshahi family became one of the most significant philanthropic presences in British Columbia, funding cancer research at Vancouver General Hospital, supporting arts institutions, endowing academic programs at the University of British Columbia. The man who had left Iran with nothing had, by any reasonable measure, built something extraordinary and then used it to build something more. He did not comment publicly on the closure of Future Shop in 2015. There was no statement, no interview, no public acknowledgement of what the end of the brand meant to him personally. Whether that silence reflected grief, indifference, or simply the discipline of a private man who had made his peace with a transaction completed 14 years earlier, no one outside his family could say with certainty. What could be said with certainty was that the brand he had built, the specific culture, the commission model, the red shirt identity, the open floor philosophy, did not survive the sale. It had survived for 14 years under Best Buy's ownership, diminished and gradually hollowed out, but recognizable. After March 28, 2015, it was gone completely. The stores that had been Future Shop became Best Buy. The salespeople who had defined the floor culture either left or adapted to an hourly wage structure that bore no resemblance to the world they had trained in. The institutional knowledge accumulated over 3 decades, which products failed, which suppliers could be trusted, which customers needed time, and which needed confidence, dispersed into the wider economy, unrecorded and unretrievable. Best Buy Canada, for its part, did not inherit Future Shop's strength by eliminating its competition. The years following the 2015 consolidation brought their own pressures. Amazon's Canadian operation continued to expand aggressively. Consumer electronics margins compressed further as online price transparency removed the last remaining advantages of physical retail in that category. Best Buy Canada adapted, investing in services, in Geek Squad, in the kind of post-purchase support that online retailers could not easily replicate. But the growth story that the 2015 consolidation was supposed to unlock proved more complicated than the press release had suggested. The communities that had depended on Future Shop as an employer felt the closure in ways that outlasted the news cycle. In mid-sized Canadian cities, the Thunders Bay and Red Deers and Frederictons, where Future Shop had been one of the larger retail employers in the market, the loss of 100-plus jobs was not an abstraction. It was a specific number of families adjusting their finances, a specific number of young people looking for work in a retail sector that was contracting rather than expanding, a specific number of experienced salespeople whose primary professional credential, deep expertise in consumer electronics, developed over years on a commission floor, had limited transferability to an industry that was moving away from that model entirely. The mall locations that lost their Future Shop anchor did not always recover. The large format retail box, which had been Future Shop's preferred real estate for 30 years, was already becoming a liability in the mid-2010s as foot traffic patterns shifted and the retail categories that could sustain those spaces shrank. Some landlords found new tenants quickly, others did not. The empty boxes became, in some markets, the most visible monument to what had changed. Large, dark, and difficult to repurpose, sitting at the edge of parking lots that had once been full on a Saturday morning. The broader retail industry absorbed the lesson that Future Shop's story offered, the way industries absorb lessons, partially, selectively, and too late to change much. The lesson was not complicated. A commission culture, built over decades on genuine expertise and genuine accountability, cannot be acquired and maintained by a parent company whose operational philosophy is fundamentally incompatible with it. You can buy the stores, you can buy the signs, you can buy the leases and the supplier relationships and the customer database. You cannot buy the culture. And if you dismantle the culture gradually through budget decisions and strategic neglect, without ever announcing what you are doing, you will eventually own nothing but the real estate. What do we lose when a gathering place disappears? Not because it failed, but because someone decided its failure was more useful than its survival. Canada lost Future Shop on a Saturday morning without a single day's warning. The answer to that question is still being calculated in empty storefronts and updated resumes, and the specific absence felt by the people who built the brand and were never thanked for it. Picture a Friday evening in the fall of 1997, a Future Shop somewhere in Ontario. It could be Mississauga, it could be Hamilton, it could be any of a dozen cities where the red sign burned above a strip mall on a 4-lane road. The parking lot is full. Inside, the floor is alive in the way that only that floor ever was. Televisions running on every wall, the deep thud of a subwoofer demonstration rolling through the carpet beneath your feet, the smell of new electronics and fresh packaging, and the faint metallic warmth of powered devices running in an enclosed space. A father and his teenage son are standing in front of a row of desktop computers. The son has been in this store 100 times. He knows what he wants. The father is asking questions he does not fully understand, because he wants to understand before he spends the money. A salesperson in a red shirt has been with them for 20 minutes. He is not rushing them. He is answering every question with the patience of someone who knows that this decision matters to this family and that his job, his actual financially consequential job, is to make sure they leave with the right one. The son picks up the box, the father nods. They walk to the cash register together. That moment happened 10,000 times in 149 stores across 33 years. Future Shop was never really about electronics. Electronics were the medium. What Future Shop was actually selling, what it had been selling since Hassan Khosrow-Shahi opened that first Vancouver store in 1982, was access. The specific democratic promise that the technology shaping the modern world was not reserved for the wealthy or the well-connected, that a working family in Red Deer or a recent immigrant in Brampton or a young couple in Halifax could walk through those sliding doors and be treated with the same seriousness, the same expertise, the same genuine attention as anyone else. That promise was not unique to Future Shop in theory. Every retailer claims to serve every customer. What made Future Shop different was the mechanism, the commission model that aligned the salesperson's financial interest with the customer's genuine satisfaction. Not perfectly, not always, but structurally in a way that no non-commissioned floor could replicate. When the person helping you needed you to leave happy in order to make their rent, the help was different. It was real. For the generation of new Canadians who had made Future Shop their store, who had been greeted in their own language, who had been helped without condescension, who had walked out with technology that connected their families to a new country, the brand carried a meaning that went beyond any product it sold. It was evidence that Canada could be, in at least one specific and concrete place, the country it claimed to be: open, accessible, willing to meet you where you were. For the young Canadians who had built careers on that commission floor, who had learned that hustle and knowledge and genuine service could build a life without a university degree or a family connection or a foot already in the door, Future Shop represented something that is genuinely rare in any economy: a meritocracy that actually worked. You earned what you produced. The floor did not care where you came from. It cared what you could do. When Future Shop closed, those things did not transfer to Best Buy. They did not transfer anywhere. They simply ended, along with the culture that had produced them, the people who had sustained them, and the specific, unrepeatable combination of founder vision and floor energy that had made them possible in the first place. Some things, when they are gone, leave a shape behind them, an outline of what was there, visible in the absence. Future Shop left that kind of shape. The red signs are gone now. The parking lots where people lined up at 4 in the morning on Boxing Day belonged to other stores or to no store at all. The salespeople who knew every product on that floor by heart are in other industries, other cities, other lives. The father who stood at the cash register with his son in 1997 is probably a grandfather now. The son is probably buying his own children's first laptops online at midnight without talking to anyone. That is not a tragedy. It is simply the shape that time takes. What deserves to be remembered, what this story has tried to hold carefully from beginning to end, is not the company. Companies are legal structures. They are bought and sold and consolidated and dissolved, and the world moves on. What deserves to be remembered is what the people built inside it. The founder who carried an idea out of a country that was burning and proved it was worth something. The salespeople who gave years of their working lives to a floor culture that asked everything of them and for a long time gave everything back. The customers who trusted the red shirt year after year with decisions that mattered to their families. They built something real. It was here. And for the people who remember it, who can still hear the bass from the speaker demonstration and smell the new plastic and feel the weight of a box carried to the car on a cold Canadian evening, it always will be.